Two men sat in total darkness, a mile beneath the Bitterroot Mountains, waiting to find out if anyone was still coming for them. Tom Wilkinson was 29. Ron Flory was 28. They had sealed themselves in a storage room on the 4,800 level of the Sunshine Mine, and through a borehole drilled up toward the surface came a thread of fresh air, barely enough to detect. The absolute minimum that could keep a man alive if he stayed still and breathed with care. They had no light, no contact with the surface, no sound from above. Just the borehole, the cold rock, and time they couldn't measure. To understand how they got there, you have to go back to 11:40 that morning, to the moment the disaster became visible. May 2nd, 1972. A miner on the 3,700 level noticed smoke rising through the 910 rays. Not the familiar haze that clings to a man's jacket at the end of a shift. This was thick, fast, moving with a direction that smoke in a mine should not have. The Sunshine Mine was the most productive silver mine in the United States. Over 5,600 feet deep, nearly 100 miles of tunnels carved through ancient rock. More than 360 million ounces of silver pulled from those passages across decades of continuous operation. That Tuesday, 173 men had gone underground. Some were almost a mile down, loading ore cars, moving between levels through narrow manways, running haulage lines, checking equipment in the half-light. Most of them lived in Kellogg, the small town above, and most of their fathers had worked these same tunnels before them. This wasn't just employment, it was the structure around which whole lives had been built across generations. A few were close to retirement. Others had swapped shifts as a favor that morning. Men who could have had the day to themselves, and instead showed up at the portal. None of them knew a fire had already started somewhere beneath them. The smoke rising through the 910 rays was not the beginning. It was just the moment the beginning became visible. And the fire had started in the worst possible place. The probable source was discarded timber near the mine's fresh air intake on the 3,700 level, ignited, federal investigators believed, by spontaneous combustion. The exact origin was never confirmed with certainty. What they could confirm was the speed. The fire had begun at the precise point in the ventilation system where fresh air entered the mine and was pushed down through raises and crosscuts to every occupied level below. When that intake began burning, the network built to keep 173 men breathing became the system that delivered carbon monoxide to all of them, within minutes. And there was something coating the walls of those passages. A polyurethane foam called Rigaciel sprayed through the tunnels for years to seal leaks and direct airflow more efficiently. Rigaciel was also highly flammable. The British had recognized the danger and banned polyurethane foam from underground mines in 1962, a full decade before the Sunshine Fire. In 1966, the United States Bureau of Mines ran its own laboratory tests and reached an identical conclusion. The material was a serious fire hazard in underground conditions. No action followed. No ban was issued. No order came to strip it from American mines the way the British had stripped it from theirs years before. It stayed in the Sunshine Mine, lining the very passages every man inside would need to move through in any emergency. The clearest sign the industry eventually understood the danger came in a single quiet fact, noted only after the disaster. No American mine used polyurethane foam underground again. That understanding arrived 6 years too late, and at the cost of 91 lives. The decision not to act in 1966 was not made in the tunnels beneath Kellogg. It was made at a desk, above ground, by people who would never go down there, and it sealed the outcome before the fire was ever lit. Below, the men had minutes, and most of them didn't know it. Carbon monoxide carries no smell. At the concentrations building in those corridors, it produces no visible haze, no warning, nothing the body recognizes as danger. Men sometimes didn't realize they'd been affected until they could no longer stand without support, until their legs simply stopped answering. Shaft foreman Fred Gene Johnson ordered the evacuation at about 12:03. The plan called for miners on the deeper levels to be hoisted up the number 10 shaft to the 3,100 level, then directed across to the jewel shaft for the final lift to the surface. The chippy hoist, the mine's primary elevator, running up through the number 10 shaft, would carry the bulk of them. Smoke overwhelmed the chippy hoist control room almost immediately. It went offline before a single man from the deepest levels had been lifted. What remained were two smaller double-drum hoists and the men operating them, already absorbing carbon monoxide with every breath they took at the controls. Byron Schultz was 21 years old, working that day as a cager, the man who runs the cage and manages the miners boarding it. He dropped it into the worsening air, again and again, collecting groups of men and hauling them upward through the shaft, then sending it back down into what the tunnels were becoming. Every run required him to go back into it. Carbon monoxide gave no sign. Men boarding the cage sometimes didn't know they were already affected until they sagged against the walls. Johnson, the men assisting at the shaft, the miners being lifted, all of them were fighting the same invisible thing with every passing minute. Between 12:10, when the double drum hoist began running, and 1:30, when the last survivor reached the surface, 80 men came out. Then, at 1:02, a hoistman at one of the two remaining hoists lost consciousness at his controls. The hoist stopped. In under an hour, the mine had lost its main elevator to smoke and a backup operator to the same invisible gas. The 80 who had reached the surface were no longer being followed by anyone. 91 men were still below, and the carbon monoxide had moved faster than the escape ever could. Schultz was near the last of the survivors out, found barely conscious by a rescue team pushing inward as the survivors stumbled out, unable to support his own weight. Safety engineer Robert Lonhart was leading that team toward the number 10 shaft when they reached him. Don Biener, one of the team, removed his own breathing apparatus without a moment's deliberation and pressed it over Schultz's face. Schultz recovered enough to be carried up. Biener collapsed behind him. His colleagues tried to revive him and could not. The smoke was still advancing, and there was no time to stay. They left him where he had fallen, the last confirmed death of the disaster. A man who died after the rescue had already begun, because he gave his air away. The rest of the dead were found later, where the gas had caught them. 31 on the 3,100 level, near the passages that should have carried them across toward the jewel shaft and out. 21 more on the 5,200. 16 on the 3,700. Others across the 4,400, 4,800, and 4,200 levels. On the 5,200, a group of men had tried to build a barricade, stacking materials against the corridor walls to hold the advancing gas back long enough to outlast it. They ran out of time before the barrier was finished. And the cruelest part is how many of them had a chance they never knew they had. Self-rescuers, small rebreather canisters capable of roughly 30 minutes of protected breathing in contaminated air, had been stocked near first aid stations and work areas throughout the mine. Most miners had never been trained to use them. The devices grow hot during use, a normal product of the chemical reaction that filters carbon monoxide out of the air. Men who had never been shown this expected cold equipment decided the heat meant the unit was defective and threw it away. Others pressed wet cloth against their faces, not knowing that carbon monoxide passes through fabric without resistance. There were no carbon monoxide detectors anywhere in the mine. No emergency escape routes had been marked out, or posted. No evacuation drill had ever been run with the workforce. Some of the self-rescuers sitting in storage had been manufactured in 1951. These men had gone underground that morning, trusting the systems around them. That trust wasn't irrational. It was simply built from incomplete information the mine had never given them. The oldest man who died was 61. The youngest was 19. Together, the 91 left behind 77 widows and 200 children. And through all of it, 2 men on the 4,800 level were still alive in the dark. Tom and Ron had made a different decision when the air changed around them. Not toward the exits, but into that sealed storage room by the number 12 borehole, and the thin current of air coming down it. They had their own packed lunches, the food every miner carried down for his shift. But that would not last long. So they did the only thing left to them. They gathered the lunches of the men who had died nearby, miners who had been moving toward an exit when the gas closed around them, and who never made it. Tom and Ron rationed all of it, the living eating the meals of the dead, and they settled in to wait. Underground dark is unlike any darkness above the surface. There is no ambient light anywhere, no glow from any source, nothing for the eye to adjust to. Open eyes and closed eyes produce exactly the same nothing. They sat in that condition for hours, then for days. No way to reach the surface. No way to know whether the rescue was still coming, or had been called off, or had ever started. They breathed slowly, and they listened to a silence so complete it pressed in on them like the rock itself. The rescue was coming, but it was crawling. The fire had wrecked the mine's electrical systems, and the hoists themselves needed repair before crews could reach the deep levels at all. Rescue teams worked in 2-hour rotations, the limit imposed by their oxygen tank capacity, descending as far as the repaired equipment allowed, then surfacing to refill their tanks and going down again. Every trip took them past the men who hadn't made it, past the same bodies in the same passages, on every single descent. They called out into the tunnels on every run. The tunnels gave back silence, day after day after day. Above ground, Kellogg held a kind of quiet that the survivors would spend the rest of their lives unable to put into words. A town of roughly 4,000 people, and the mine employed a large share of its working men. 91 of them were gone. Families gathered at the mine entrance and stayed there through the days that followed, waiting for news that came in fragments and then stopped coming at all. Funerals began within the first week and continued for nearly a month, sometimes more than one in a single afternoon. 2 days after the fire, President Nixon formally requested a federal investigation, and congressional scrutiny followed within days. The Bureau of Mines Inquiry found failure in every category of safety preparedness. No carbon monoxide monitoring, no oxygen staged along the number 10 shaft escape route, no posted escape paths, no drills, self-rescuers in inadequate supply and deteriorating condition, some dating back 21 years, and polyurethane foam confirmed to have accelerated both the fire and the spread of the toxic gas, through a ventilation design that had no contingency for a fire at the intake. It was never one catastrophic decision made on the morning of May 2nd. It was a sequence of them, made across years, hazards documented without action, warnings issued without follow-through, a workplace operating near the edge of its safety margins for so long that those margins had stopped being visible to anyone. In 1977, 5 years after the disaster, Congress passed the Federal Mine Safety and Health Act, creating the Mine Safety and Health Administration, mandating personal rescue breathing devices for every underground miner, requiring regular evacuation drills, and putting real enforcement authority behind ventilation standards. None of it reached the 91 men who clocked in on a Tuesday morning in May of 1972. On May 9th, 175 hours after smoke first rose through the 910 rays on the 3,700 level, a rescue team reached the 4,800 level and opened the storage room near the number 12 borehole. Tom Wilkinson and Ron Flory were alive. Both men walked out of the mine under their own power. More than 7 days underground, on rationed food, still air, and a borehole's worth of oxygen, in the middle of 100 miles of tunnels that had been filled with carbon monoxide for the better part of a week. The mine closed for 7 months. It reopened in December 1972 and eventually returned to full production, reclaiming its standing as the nation's top silver producer. A memorial stands near the entrance now, a 13-foot steel miner, his headlamp lit, looking outward toward the Idaho mountains. It was built by hand by Ken Lawn, a former miner and shift boss who worked at the Sunshine after the fire, in a machine shop on the mine's own property. In front of the figure, arranged across the ground, are 91 small markers, one for each man. The youngest belongs to a boy of 19. He had been underground before, and if anyone had thought to ask him that morning, he would have said he understood the risks.